All right, so let's just jump right in. Think about this for a second. How does a guy who loses absolutely everything, his job, his home, his good name, somehow manage to turn that total crushing failure into one of the greatest works of art ever created? That's the unbelievable paradox of Dante Alighieri. And today, we're going to unpack exactly how his own personal hell gave birth to an immortal masterpiece. But first things first, we've got to get past the image most of us have of Dante. You know the one, this quiet, wise poet. To really get his work, we have to understand the messy, brutal world he was actually living in. So on the one hand, you have the myth, the calm poet with a laurel wreath, maybe sitting in his study. But the truth is so much more intense. Dante was a hardcore political operator in 13th century Florence. And you need to understand, this place wasn't some quaint Renaissance town. It was more like a scene from a political thriller, full of backstabbing and bloody feuds. The whole city was split between these two factions, the Guelphs and the Ghibellines. And for them, losing power wasn't just about stepping aside. No, it meant losing your home, your money, and very often, your life. And Dante, he climbed all the way to the very top of this treacherous political ladder, which, of course, just made his fall that much more catastrophic. And his fall from grace, it was shockingly fast. I mean, in the year 1300, he's at the absolute pinnacle of power in Florence. He's one of the 6 priors, the highest office you could hold. Just 1 year later, he's sent to Rome on a diplomatic trip. And while he's gone, his enemies back home stage a violent coup. By 1302, they've convicted him, without him even being there, by the way, on totally bogus charges of corruption. Then years later, they offer him a chance to come back. But there's a catch. He has to publicly admit he's guilty and pay a massive fine. Dante, being a man of incredible pride, basically tells them to forget it. And so what happens? They make his sentence even worse. And that was the official sentence. This wasn't just some empty threat. It was a literal death sentence. The very city he had served, the home he loved, officially declared that if he ever dared to return, he would be publicly burned at the stake. Just try to imagine the scale of that loss. It was staggering. In the blink of an eye, he went from being one of the most powerful men in Florence to a penniless, homeless wanderer with a death sentence hanging over his head. He spent the rest of his life just roaming around Italy, completely dependent on the generosity of others. But here's the twist. It was right there, at rock bottom, from the smoldering ruins of his life, that 2 incredibly powerful forces ignited his creative genius: a pure, all-consuming love and a righteous, burning rage. Let's start with the first and maybe the most important light in his darkness, Beatrice. He met her when they were both just 9 years old, and he was instantly love-struck. He only ever saw her a handful of times after that, and she died tragically young at just 24. But for Dante, this wasn't just some childhood crush. It became, well, everything. Now, to really grasp how radical Dante's love for Beatrice was, you have to know what was popular at the time. It was this idea of courtly love. Think Lancelot and Guinevere. It was all about these passionate, secret, and often forbidden affairs that more often than not ended in total disaster. Dante takes that whole idea and just flips it on its head. Instead of his love being this destructive, earthly obsession, he elevates it into something divine. For him, Beatrice isn't an object of desire. She becomes his spiritual guide. Her memory becomes the force that can pull his soul out of despair and lead him all the way to God. She was, quite literally, his path to salvation. And this spiritual journey, with Beatrice as his guide and his righteous anger as the fuel, became the blueprint for an entire universe, a perfectly ordered kingdom that he built not with bricks and mortar, but with words. The Divine Comedy. The whole structure of this masterpiece is based on this divine architecture, and the number 3 is its cornerstone, representing the Holy Trinity. It's everywhere. The poem has 3 books: Inferno, Purgatorio, and Paradiso. And it's written in this beautiful, interlocking 3-line rhyme scheme called terza rima. And it goes even deeper than that. Each of those 3 books, it's made up of exactly 33 sections, or cantos. The mathematical precision of it all is just mind-blowing. So you take those 99 cantos, you add 1 introductory canto at the very beginning, and what do you get? A grand total of 100. And in the Middle Ages, the number 100 symbolized perfection. Dante was literally building a literary cathedral, and every single brick was laid with perfect, deliberate intention. So readers back then were expected to get the story on 4 different levels, all at the same time. This was a huge deal because it treated literature with the same seriousness as Holy Scripture. You had to really dig deep. So for example, the poem opens with Dante lost in a dark wood. Literally, yeah, a guy's lost in a forest. But allegorically, it's Dante the politician, exiled and lost from his city. Morally, it represents any one of us lost in sin. And anagogically, it's all of humanity, cut off from God. One simple image, 4 whole dimensions of meaning. Now, Dante used this perfect multi-layered universe for more than just a spiritual quest. It was also, and this is crucial, his ultimate revenge. See, in the real world, he was a powerless outcast. But in the world of his poem, he was the absolute judge, jury, and executioner. And to do this, he made a choice that was nothing short of revolutionary. At the time, if you were writing something serious, theology, philosophy, a grand epic, it had to be in Latin. That was the language of the educated, the elite, the church. But Dante, he writes his cosmic masterpiece in the Tuscan dialect, the everyday language spoken by merchants and farmers in his region. He was basically arguing that the language of ordinary people was just as capable of expressing divine truth as the language of scholars. And the result of this choice was just incredible. The Divine Comedy was so powerful, so beautiful, that it became the gold standard. His local Tuscan dialect became the foundation for what we now call modern Italian. And that's the real kicker. In his personal quest for justice, he accidentally gave a future nation its language, uniting a culture centuries before Italy even existed as a country. A private mission of revenge laid the groundwork for a national identity. The famous composer Giuseppe Verdi put it perfectly. Someone asked him to donate money for a physical monument to Dante, and he refused. He said Dante had already built his own monument, one far greater than anything made of stone. His real legacy wasn't a statue, it was the language and literature of an entire nation. And all of this leads us to one last, really provocative question. We've seen how Dante's complete and utter failure was the fuel for his masterpiece. But what if things had gone the other way? What if Dante had won all his political fights? What if he'd lived a long, successful life as a leader in Florence and gotten to marry his beloved Beatrice? Sure, he might have been happy, but humanity would have been infinitely poorer for it. We wouldn't have the Divine Comedy. The Italian language as we know it might not even exist. His story is this powerful reminder that sometimes the greatest acts of creation don't come from success, but are born in the dark woods of our deepest failures.